Where's Lady?
She had to go clean.
Oh yeah. We're having lots of fun with cleaners right now.
Oh yeah.
Lord bless our sister Lady. Strengthen her heart, her mind. Bless our time together this morning. Thank you for each one of these here with us. Lord, we want to learn of you and draw near to you. Pray for the touch of your spirit and insight from your own mind. We bless your name. Amen. Where are we? 21? Yeah. 13:21, I think. Okay.
Cheers on 20?
Yeah, they can be 20.
So I have 19 marked last.
We did
No.
some weird thing where it skipped around.
we looked at 20 early.
Yeah. I recall 20.
And then last time we ended with 19, so. Okay, 21. All right. Kayla, if you'll read the first part, and Esther, the second part.
The master said, if you cannot manage to find a person of perfectly balanced conduct to associate with, I suppose you must settle for the wild or... How do you say that? Fastidious. In their pursuit of the way. The wild plunge right in, while the fastidious are always careful not to get their hands dirty.
In the commentary to 522, we have already cited portions of Mencius, which discuss both 522 and 1321. The wild, Kwang have a preponderance of native substance insufficiently shaped by refinement, while the fastidious,
It's Jen.
lack the passion, flexibility, and courage possessed by a true gentleman. Zulu might serve as an example of the former, while examples of the latter include the excessively
Windsor.
And 519, the overly cautious G. Binza. In 520, the excessively scrupulous disciple,
Yensu.
Binza. In 6.5 and 14.1, or the various principled recluses presented in books 14 and 18. These two types represent extremes of the ethical spectrum, and each has its strengths, but it is the mean between these two extremes that is truly desirable.
What does preponderance mean?
Tendency, maybe?
Is it?
says the quality or fact of being greater in number, quantity, or importance.
I think there's probably several definitions there.
Yeah, that's one of them. I don't know what it's using in this one though.
It is. It's like something that they already have.
Mm-hmm. A predisposition towards.
Hello.
So he says you must settle for the wild or the fastidious.
What's the fastidious definition?
Like attention to detail.
I think it's interesting that there's a bunch of examples for the fastidious, and then when it comes to the wild, it was just salute.
Poor salute. Beloved salute.
I will say, just from our experience with him, there is something very endearing about the wild type, because I think there's a lack of presumption on, well, they do presume often, but they're, at least Zalou is, very open to correction regardless. He is a little hasty, but I think there is an endearing factor of the willingness to change in that type of person.
Well, I think this is just kind of an interesting analyte because I think that it's quite obvious that there's not anyone that's perfectly balanced to begin with. So there's a different way of thinking about who you relate to presented here.
You know what this really reminds me of? The other day when we were able to meet, you had kind of just randomly, but it really stuck with me, talked about like the different types of people, like coworkers I had at Granny's, and kind of walked through, do you remember that? Like kind of like the different, and I like this week was like really kind of intentional and trying to see people in a more, I was really just trying to see people in that way. Do you know what I mean? I was really trying to see like, what are they in that light? And I don't know, it reminds me of that in that way of it's, I think, yeah, it is a little difficult to put people into just like two categories. I think like 4 and then kind of like where you land in that is a little easier, but I, in this light, can see it that way. And I think with the fastidious, or I guess another way of putting that would be the more intellectually minded people, I think there is a little bit more of a tendency to be very, I guess, intellectually guided, and in that it's a lot more difficult to have a meaningful conversation with such a person, at least in my experience. Because I think that with a lot of those types of people, there is already kind of this idea that they have, and the conversation is never about like discussing and trying to see the other person. It is, I'm going to convince you of my idea because I am walking into this conversation with the presumption that I am right. Whereas I think the people that I can see falling more into the wild category, there are parts of them that are definitely a little, what would be the word? I guess wild, but that might be slightly off-putting. But I have noticed that there is often a genuineness that is lacked in more intellectual people. There's an actual, I feel like I am talking with such a person, if that makes sense. I feel like they are actually hearing me by just virtue of like the questions that they ask after I'll say something, or just the kind of things they'll say. Whereas you can tell with another type of person, the things they say are immediately a retort or an argument, or a, have you considered this in the way of, I'm trying to dismantle what you are saying.
It's interesting. Oh, sorry, Matt.
Go ahead.
I mean, direct translations can be messed up, especially since it's such a long-going thing. But I looked up the second one, John, and it's actually like arrogant or shrewd.
Yeah, that would make a lot more sense. Yeah.
So that makes sense in what he's actually saying
For
here.
fastidious.
Yeah, like arrogant.
Arrogance is a good word. That's very much what comes to my mind.
Yeah. And then Kwang is actually like mad.
Mad.
Crazy.
Oh yeah.
Fangsa.
Yeah, that's funny.
What?
Yeah. That was crazy man.
Oh, whoa. Wait, what are you talking about? So, okay, never mind. Sorry.
Something Emmanuel used to say. Crazy, the crazy man.
Yeah, it means crazy. Yeah.
What? Fangsa.
I didn't look that up. I just said.
Yeah.
You're going off.
See, I know some things.
Here, wait.
Just
Just
a couple.
let me. Fungda means crazy. Fungda. I don't know. I haven't heard that before.
What were you thinking, Dad? If you recall.
Well, I mean, it's interesting here, that, if you interpret, fastidious as arrogant or shrewd, then you would think, well, I don't want any of that.
But there's a balance.
But so that's what I'm saying, right? Is, to cast one and only a negative light, there's got to be something positive there. Otherwise, there wouldn't be no need to balance towards it. Right.
Well, I think in that especially, it's definitely the refinement of such a person. You know what I mean? I think with the wild, while it is definitely a benefit that they have such a lending ear, there's also not really a, what would I say? Like a ground that they stand on. It's very I don't know how to put that. But there's a refinement that kind of person has that is very desirable. It's just often they are so refined in themselves that they can't see anything outside of themselves. I think that's the part that even I am now starting to see is I think I was very much falling into the fastidious camp kind of before coming here. And then I think over time I've kind of been pushed in the very, very opposite direction.
So now you're crazy?
Yeah, something like that. And I am now, even in just in interacting with more fastidious people, am trying to find the ways to refine myself in a way outside of myself. Because I am now seeing how desirable that quality is. Like, there is something very elegant about refinement. Even if it is in something like yourself, there's an elegance that person carries. And so I think that even more so when that refinement is in a principle, in a way that you're following, that isn't just rooted in your own logical processes, I think there's something very beautiful in that. I almost think of it like a kite, almost. It's a stupid analogy, I know, but if a wild person is this, think of like a plastic bag just in the wind, kind of just blowing with whatever winds they may have, and this fastidious person is more like an anchor tethered to the ground. I suppose that the balanced person would be something like a kite. You have a tether, a very clear tether, but you're not so tethered that you can't move with the sways of the wind.
Mm-hmm. I think that the commentary probably does a pretty good job of giving some adjectives that help understand maybe a little bit more closer to what's being shared. The lack of what is in the fastidious person, that's passion, flexibility, and courage. It doesn't necessarily mean that is the overt qualities of the wild one, but passion is definitely, I mean, those one needs, I think, Noah, what's the, there's another Analect regarding, shooting the arrow and shooting over versus under. And I think that's the same dichotomy expressed differently. The context of this is also in relationship to how to govern through personal example. That's what all the Analects of Book 13 are about. And so I don't think the focus is so much here, am I a wild person or am I a fastidious person? The focus is how to govern in the midst of these dichotomies and find the mean through personal example, which means you don't want to be caught in either extreme, but you need to understand them both. And so, it's in our lives, the more that we expand, grow, mature, and form as a spiritual person in life, the less we contextualize things around ourselves. This is my character, quality state, or this is that person's. We look at it in the context of how things work together for a whole. And that's not just a state of maturity per se, or growth. It's not directly connected to that. It comes as a part of that, but it comes with an added responsibility of life that enables them to have a more keen awareness of their situation and how to administer the mean, in this case, or truth, a true way, in the midst of it. So the true leader, by leading by example, we will remember it's not because he goes to the fastidious and says, "You're fastidious," or that he goes to the wild man and says, "You're crazy." He is stable. That person remains unchanged in the application of the standard, or that mean, the median of truth in their own life. It's not that they're unaware of those other things, it's that they're not swayed by them. And because they are not swayed by them, they are unshakable, immovable in a sense. Then others are drawn from their extreme to this standard. So Confucius' assumption is not necessarily even that the leader is to presume that they have already met that standard. They only continue to submit to that standard as the rod, the unbending rod in front of them that they conform to. And because they have committed to that confirmation, conforming to it, then the other things draw to that. And I don't know how to explain this fully, but this is not just about riding the fence or being in the middle. Truth is not a middle. It's not a compromise. It is an absolute. It's a standard. And so is the mean, the way. It doesn't change. The way that you operate in a given situation may change, but the way that you move in all that you say and do, the way that you act doesn't change, no matter the situation that you're put in. The goal doesn't change. The directive that you have and the standard that you bear doesn't change. And that's why in some of our previous discussion a couple weeks ago, we found that three sage kings had different responses to the same situation at different times. But they all held the same standard. So Mencius here, in reference to Mencius again, submitted that they would have all made the same decision that each other did, even though it's not the one they made for their time and their place, because they recognize what it was in the midst of that. And know if you want to, if it's helpful, if you think it's helpful, maybe draw from that other example that I referred to with the shooting of the arrows.
Well,
Or maybe have another one that's a better reference.
yeah, with the, I wish I remembered which Analect that was. There was an example given by Confucius. It is more or less along these same lines of being overly zealous or being fastidious or reserved in one's pursuit of the mean or practice of virtue, and he illustrated it with the sport of archery, saying that to be overly zealous is to overshoot the mark, and to be fastidious is to undershoot it. And he was using this as a lesson for a few of his disciples at that time. As it even says in the commentary here, it's the goal to find the mean between those. And I think, as my dad is saying as well, this is much better to look at in terms of how you carry yourself before others in such a way that actually instructs, and not even in like a vain or like objective or intentional way necessarily, but in a natural way. What you do, how you carry yourself as a person, actually adjusts the behavior of others. Of course, that depends on the way you relate to them, but there's a kind of influence that you have as it would be put in the Analects, a gentleman in the midst of your people, of your family. As an example, as a ruler, as it's also put in the Analects. Of course, we don't refer to one another as rulers, but we still are learning to more consciously carry that influence towards one another, even if it's like in a intergenerational way. Anyways, it's kind of besides the point. What I was saying with the adjustment part of that is you do learn to assess other lives as if they are not, as Confucius says, perfectly balanced in their conduct, and I think you're going to find very few people that are, and that includes yourself, then I think part of his encouragement here is don't be ashamed or discouraged to deal with those who you view as wild or who you view as fastidious, because there are just different means by which you learn to carry yourself around them in such a way that I'm trying to like draw a bit of a line here between how we carry ourselves in respect to one another, generally speaking, and how we actually invest in other lives, even as those who have been put in the place of instruction or discipleship for another life. Because in the latter case, you do apply yourself in a much more specific and intentional way. And in that case, the wild, those who have, as he says, a preponderance of native substance, are those who require they require different kinds of adjustments, obviously, than the fastidious do. The real difference being that they require major adjustments. And I don't mean that in like a demeaning way, but it's simply what is needed for them. They require like that's that work of cultural refinement. There's a need to just really sometimes just to show them the obvious things that would seem almost too simple or redundant to introduce, but which actually need to be brought up continuously. Things like obvious flaws in their character. Like we just look at how Confucius will confront someone like Zulu, because that was the person pointed out. He'll be really straightforward with him. He'll be even somewhat harsh with him. He'll kind of stop him in his tracks. That's the way that he dealt with that kind of character. The fastidious people are kind of on the other side of this spectrum, as it's being put. They require these like minute, these small adjustments, but they're actually far more difficult to deal with, I would say. Because I think the general sentiment when we were talking about the differences between the two is that we'd probably rather deal with the wild person than we would with the fastidious, because they carry this sense of self-righteousness. There's this barrier between the teacher and themselves, because they assume that they already have what they need. So there's like an excessive, if it can even be put this way, there's like an excessive cultural refinement and almost a disregard for and even a looking down upon native substance. And in that case, they are a more difficult situation. But of course, there's a lot more subtlety on the part of the teacher and the master in dealing with such people. I know I went far past what you asked me to go into with the analogy of the archer, but I think the best illustration that gives us is that there's a temperance needed for those who are wild. This is going to sound really obvious, but there's a temperance needed for those who overshoot the mark, and there's a need to inspire courage in those who are fastidious or who undershoot it. And
like Jaden said, to kind of come out of themselves a bit. I think being over analytical is another, way to describe that. Actually, I think that illustration was Emmanuel's and not Confucius.
No,
about
there's
overshooting. The one that is, I think, the one that
11,
is.
16.
Huh?
Yep.
11:16. You found it?
Yeah.
Because 3:16 is another one that is similar to that. But I know he referred to it because I very distinctly remember that. Yep, there we go. That's it. Thanks, us. Overshooting the mark is just as bad as falling short of it. Which one is better is the question,
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's important to understand that this is not simply finding the middle ground. That's not parallel or equivalent to the mean.
Mm-hmm.
But what's standing out to me, I'm trying not to make it into like a, how do you say that? Like a search for something that's spiritually high, like high-mindedness or something in spiritual pursuit. But what's standing out to me, like what you said, is the one who's following the way has that standard in front of them, and they're after that, and it's not the same as those people that are on that scale of like, which side are you? Are you the one that's way over there, or you the one that's way over there? Well, the guy that's following the mean is not in the middle of that scale. That's a different level. The one who follows the mean, the way, is on a whole nother level, because he's not in the midst of that trying to fit into, like, oh, I'm balanced more than these other guys are. I'm not either that one or that one, so I'm in the middle. It's like the standard is a different way. It's a different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you're living under that standard, you're gonna naturally be in that place that isn't on either side. It's not that your focus, like you're saying, your focus isn't being in the middle.
Yeah.
It's a different focus.
One interesting difference I see between the two that can be put in yet another analogy is like if the person is like a lump of clay, the wild are just this rough-hewn lump, but they have plenty of substance to work with, while the fastidious, they inherently don't have enough substance to work with. And maybe even what is there has already been shaped into something, but it's not something that it should be quite yet. It's like it's its own form. It has its own. It's been enhanced with its own idea of what it means to be refined culturally. And so that the reason such people are a bit more of a project is because we need more substance in the first place. That's kind of that lack of courage, that lack of involvement. That's kind of the undershooting. And maybe what had been refined in a certain way needs to be itself be adjusted, or maybe even rubbed out. And so there's a lot more to do with those people. But that doesn't really make them, that doesn't make, of course, that doesn't make the wild a whole lot easier, because they are just a huge lump of clay. There's a lot that needs to be worked on with them too. I hopefully none of this is seeming like, and this is how it's most readily understood in the Analects, but it's not just like a teacher and student sort of thing, as if we're being given instructions on how to treat people like lumps of clay. That's not what I want to imply there at all. But it's more of understanding how something like discipleship works, and also how even we can examine these both of these tendencies in ourselves and in one another. Because as it was also the point that was also made earlier is that it's not a matter of identifying ourselves or one another as one or the other. I'm a wild person or I'm a fastidious person. That's not necessarily the point, but there is a kind of spectrum there in which we can observe tendencies of both in ourselves.
I think of it as well, just along what you were saying with the difficulties of interacting with such people. In the conversation we had, I think that was last week, about vulnerability. And I think that it kind of scales with that spectrum according to how far along they might be. Whereas I don't think, as we discussed, that being vulnerable about everything is particularly that good, right? But simultaneously, being completely shelled up is also, you can't really work with such a person. It's not anything to say that like you want to be completely transparent about everything that's going on in your life, but that at least with that, you are in some way letting in something other than yourself. And I think that is the kind of the root of the struggle with the fastidious, is that there is no allowance for anything outside of yourself. You are locked in your own cage with nothing but your thoughts and your logic, and it is difficult for anything to reach you in that place.
Yeah, part of what I was trying to say there a minute ago, like Noah was saying, too, is we're not trying to just reach a higher spiritual level by being a person that follows after the way. We want to obviously become a person who is following the way, and that will naturally, like Elijah was saying, that will naturally balance out those things inside of us that are trying to pull one way or the other. I think.
I can't help when we read the Analects to kind of think through work, and I've had a bunch of people work for me over the years, and I there are two kind of distinct types, and you can imagine trying to go into a company and sell them something, right? And I often bring technical people with me to help sell the technical things, and there's and I'm not sure this analogy fits exactly, but it was just kind of what I was pondering through. But I typically there is one type that is just overly excited, overly aggressive. Yes, we can do everything, and then there is distinctly another type where they always want to know more information, right? I need to know this, I need to know that, I need to know this before we can move forward in any type of activity there. And working with those two people requires two very, very different things, right? The first, I almost have to put reins on them a little bit, right? And kind of bring them back down and make sure they don't get us in trouble out there in terms of promising too much. And the second, it's a little bit of encouragement, of, hey, we don't need to know everything right now. That's okay. Let's keep moving forward. And both of those are moving towards a middle. But there's very different ways that you interact with each of those personalities.
I think that's actually kind of the heart of what even is kind of being shared with how this book is meant to be taken in the kingly manner. Is I think more than self-analyzation, it really is how do you interact with people that kind of fall on either side of this spectrum. Because I think putting it as a spectrum is the best way, because there's definitely not like a you're this or you're that. It's like where in this bar do you kind of fall in that. And to your point, it's exactly that. It's how do you interact with such people? How do you lead them?
I think I might have somewhat misinterpreted that now that I think of it, because he departs actually from the theme of this book a little bit, because he's not actually directly talking about leading or teaching individuals. He's talking about who you associate with. And so that changes things just a little bit, because
It's still in the context of that position. This is not a casual personal association. It's a representative association.
yeah. But in the same light of how friends, as it is put in the Analects, are those that you can encourage and spur on in virtue, very much in a kind of iron sharpens iron kind of way. Those who are in more of like a familial relationship to you or really anyone outside of this realm of what is here called friendship, are not those that you aim to do that in an effort to guard against disrupting the order and harmony of relationships in the family. Really interesting concept that I don't think we consider that often, in the way we've been taught, especially in how the family seems like it's the primary place you'd want that to happen. But when you're raised into such a place of being able to actually grasp and seek after and practice virtue, then that's a kind of that's an effort that you learn to walk along with those who are your friends. And in this case, a true friend is someone you encourage in virtue. It's an interesting concept to me.
Mm-hmm.
But
It changes the dynamics dramatically.
right. But it's interesting how it's almost as if that relationship, or as if that kind of encouragement, that kind of spurring one another on, is actually reserved for this friendship that the gentleman has. I think looking at it in that light is actually a bit more accurate as to what the master's getting at, as far as who you associate with.
Well, we can look at briefly at 1322. It seems to be, it spends a lot of time talking about shaman practices, but I think that the essence of this Analect is actually better said in the second phrase. Because I think it's talking less about the shaman healers than it is about specifically one who lacks consistency or constancy, I mean. It says, the master said, the Southerners have a saying, the fate of a person who lacks constancy cannot be diagnosed by the shaman healers. How well put. It is also said, one inconstant in virtue will probably incur disgrace. The master commented, it simply cannot be foretold through divination. So there's a phrase that's near the end of the commentary that says he cannot have his fortune cast, means that the evidence of the hexagrams cannot reveal his essential nature, nor determine if he is to have a good or bad fortune. Constancy in 726 is contrasted with the superficial appearance of virtue. So it is plausible to take the point here to be that it is difficult to distinguish between true virtue and its counterfeit, even by supernatural means. Fortunately, we have a truth in the scriptures that is the greatest indicator of the existence of or the practice of true virtue, which is what?
Is it to lay down one's life?
What is the evidence?
That's love. I don't know. Are you trying to get
I'm just saying that this is indicating that it's very difficult to know between the superficial and the reality. But I'm saying in the context of Scripture, we're actually given some very clear indicators of what is real and what is not. And so, what are those clear indicators?
Fruit.
Yeah, the fruit of our lives, or the things that bear fruit as a result or as a product of our way of life. So, Elijah, that is a reference to a discipline, of life, which is definitely included in laying down your life. But laying down your life is the first. That's kind of like the baseline of giving way for the wisdom of the Spirit to be activated in us. And so this is a little deviation, obviously, from this text, but the text is not in this text is not in the context of spiritual truth per se. That there are many parallels, which is a lot of why we look at certain things. But the point here is the constancy, which is more described as something that is the applying yourself to a certain standard. And this dichotomy that is put here regularly in reference to the gentleman throughout the Analects, that someone can, I think there was a recent one, and there's been several that have talked about basically being able to say good words and come across as a noble person does not necessarily mean that you have a good native substance or you actually practice virtue. So there's a difference there, and that's evidenced. This evidence becomes obvious in many different ways, in the people that are around you, and the results of the decisions that you make in these cases, many of these cases, as a leader among others. But the idea of leadership is, again, in the Confucian understanding, not something that applies only to one who holds a certain position, because he delineates that all the way into personal life, and then family life, and then community life, and then the world. So there's no boundary there to where the principle doesn't apply.
Yeah, the Analect you mentioned was 12:3.
Which says what?
Somebody asked about goodness. The master said, the good person is hesitant to speak. Hesitant to speak. Is that all there is to goodness? When being good is so difficult, how can one not be hesitant about it? But it was talking about the word glib, which is a false or external counterfeit of true inner goodness. And I think you were saying in there that it stems from the love of man or a desire to please man.
Seeking the approval of men. Yeah. So you present yourself in a certain way so that you know that you will be accepted. But the actual product of your life indicates something very different than the things that you say. That was actually the case for the Pharisees. Because Jesus said, do whatever they say. Just don't do what they do, because they don't do what they say. Isn't that interesting?
In the context of counterfeit fruit, I'm kind of asking more of, but even in what you were just talking about with the pleasing to man, is there such thing of a counterfeit fruit that is visually very appealing, but that I guess what I'm asking is, there are people who surfacely have good things produced by their life, not just words, but the way that they live, but that it is very often rooted in man and the love of man and humanity. And I guess I'm kind of asking, with such fruits, what is that the counterfeit, I suppose you could say? Or would you be able to call those things counterfeit fruit?
I wouldn't call those fruit at all. I think that's a different measurement or a different standard of what fruit is. So I would say there's no such thing as a counterfeit fruit when it comes to God's judgment.
Sure.
Obviously, God's not deceived.
Mhm.
And neither do I think that. So the scriptures tell us the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, those things. Man doesn't judge by those fruits. So if there is such a thing as a counterfeit fruit, it's actually not fruit. It's just certain successes and accomplishments in life. So those are achievements, not fruit. So someone may be able to achieve a certain level of social standing, productivity.
I guess it's
Whatever
not quite,
else.
it's not quite that I'm saying.
You can express some of those fruits in an insincere manner.
It's
But what you won't be able, here's the thing.
And I'm not saying it's true fruit, but I think I get the concept you're talking about.
But hear me out. Those things they are not evidenced in your expression. They're evidenced by way of how they manifest in your relationships.
Mhm.
You cannot hide that. You can try to look like you're doing something. I'm being patient.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot hide the product of that in other people's lives, in other people's relationships, and in certain decisions that you make in life. Those will come out in a different way that you think. So that goes beyond our ability to try to squeeze fruit out of ourselves. And because the fruit is something it's like a secondary product of what is naturally coming from within. And so it supersedes superficiality.
Yeah.
So the perception initially may be something. So, you may look at that tree and see that it's flowering and say, this is good. But then that fruit may be, in reality, decayed and malformed when it comes to its ripeness, because fruit is taken at its ripeness, at its point of fullness. Okay, so in the same way that Jesus gave us the parable about the weeds and the tares, and the reality is when they're growing, they look exactly the same, and so there's not a way to differentiate between the two. But at the harvest, the difference is very obvious, because that's the final version or the final product that they have to offer. And the final product that's all I'm saying, is the final product is very obvious.
Yeah.
Even if in the process of growth something looks like it could be something. And that's why one of the elements of that particular parable that Jesus gives in reference to the angels coming to the Lord, which I think those are the messengers of God, and saying, hey, we know the enemy sowed seeds here, should we go pull everything up? And he says, no, because we would also, in essence, take away the ground and the rooting for what will produce the seed, the precious seeds. So wait until the harvest, and then we'll make the separation.
And is the harvest, in that sense, revelation? Is that what you're referring to with that?
What do you mean by revelation?
Like, I suppose I'm kind of trying to dissect seeing good things produced by people, but I can tell they are rooted in something that isn't the right way, if that makes sense. Like, the things that are being produced are very, not just it's not just a glibness, it's not just a lip service. It is those things, but there is something slightly off about them. And that's why I was asking about counterfeit fruit. Because it is a fruit that looks very appealing and that looks very identical even to genuineness. But that when you actually bite into it, you can tell it was rooted in something different, if that makes sense what I'm saying. So I'm asking, what is the harvest you are referring to? When does that process of differentiation become clear? Fair enough.
I mean, I think that you're answering your own question, because you're saying, because to me that's not a counterfeit fruit, it's just a bad fruit.
Okay.
I'm not trying to cut your thought short, but think about what you said.
No, I do get what
You
you're
bite
saying.
into it and you go, that's bad fruit. It looked like it might be good,
Mm-hmm.
but it's actually decayed.
I see.
So there's in that sense, it's not a counterfeit.
Mhm.
It's just bad fruit.
I see.
And so maybe we're just
I think it was just
scrambling
me
words a little
yeah,
bit, but like
that's
I think it's, you will know them by their fruit. So you take that fruit, it may look good, and then maybe even before you bite it, you're like, it's soft. It's the skin hadn't, the rot from the inside has not affected the outer layer yet by that initial. That's only one sense, right? You've got 5 senses
Yeah.
to deal with that give you the ability to determine good fruit. And so sometimes you can pick up watermelon and it may look beautiful, but if you shake it and it sounds like it's a half empty gallon of milk, probably don't want that watermelon. It's all liquid inside. It's all, or you pick it up and the underside's super soft. Then you think, okay, that's not what I thought. So I understand what you're saying by way of like, this looks like it might be good, but I think that's the testing
I see.
part of that. And the test is where that proof is.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, so if you relate that to personal things and in discernment in relationship with people, then you're engaging with it. And that's where that other sense that you have is something's not right. So then you test it and you go, oh yeah, I know this is a bad person, but I knew something wasn't, something was off here. And that becomes that final differentiator. But I mean, if by revelation you mean an unveiling or a manifestation of something, yes, there's your manifestation.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But that's something that is, you don't have to, in a sense, have to have some epiphany type revelation from God to determine that. And that's what he's kind of, this is referring to, is like
Constancy.
Yeah, this you don't need some seer.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to. This is more obvious than that, and that is not even the way that they are going to determine. These things are very obviously determined through what is produced. That's the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is what is actually produced. And so when you test that fruit, then no. And that is very fascinating, because this is the same kind of this was just like one of the dreams that I think the cupbearer had in when Daniel was imprisoned.
Checks as a
You mean
bookmark.
Joseph?
Joseph, yes.
I was gonna say, I remember Joseph.
Yeah,
I don't
it was
remember
Joseph.
Daniel.
Because there was a spiritual principle, not just a prophecy of what was going to happen to the guy. In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me. This is Genesis 40.
Mm.
And on the vine were 3 branches, and as soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Oh, that is the dream, but there was the other one. I too, on my head were 3 baskets of bread, and the top basket were all kinds of baked foods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating him out of the basket of my head. So there was a there's just a reference to a fulfillment that took place that was actually connected to something related to that person's way of life and decision making. So I won't dive into that because it's a little bit. Yeah.
Now, I'd love to talk more with you about it another time then, because I'm running a little behind. I won't divulge any further, but I have more questions on that.
I think it was Emma that asked me something, an interesting, a similar question some time ago. And it's all very easy to discern because, and you're right on top of that way of determination. So she texted me and she said in Matthew 7:16, when it says, "For the fruits of their character will be obvious, how can I be sure if the fruits are being produced in a life?" So then she said something in Galatians 5:22. It says, "Kindness and action and many other virtues, but how can I tell if their life is truly poured out for a higher purpose? How can I know if that's in my life producing the same fruit?" And so,
What verse is that?
that's Matthew 7:16 and Galatians 5:22. And then she says of herself, "I really hope with a pure heart that my life produces and practices this way of life. Should I ask the Father about my relationships, which ones produce the correct fruit?" So this is kind of that reference to divination, although of course there's no asking God of something is not. It is divination actually, but not in this weird way that we think.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I know which relationships to pour my life into? How interesting is this question in regard to the 2 Analects that we just read, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I said to her, "These are great questions and very important to consider in the relationships that we think we should invest in." I said, "You're not being confusing," because she said, "I'm sorry if I'm being confusing." But I said, "You might be overthinking a little bit." As the scripture says, it will be obvious. That means it will be easy to observe. When you notice or make observation of your own life or someone else's life, do you notice certain trends? Are they or you always complaining or arguing, trying to justify or excuse? Or do they or you have peace with others and stay true through difficulty?
Mm-hmm.
Do their or your actions show that they or you trust in the perfect and sovereign will of the Lord? Or do they or you just do lip service to that truth, but then wallow in self-pity when things don't go as expected? Don't judge yourself or others too harshly. Other trusted people can be queried for their observation of yours and others' lives and the fruit that is produced as well. It's wise to keep all relationships before the Father and to remain attentive to Him for the direction. Those are also healthy conversations to have with others, which will also enable you to better discern their heart and life interests. So, it's a good query.
Yep.
But it's not as difficult as you might imagine. So I think that there is something that, you might be, in a sense, this is maybe a more, an older use of the word, but something seems queer.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you engage, it becomes very obvious to you.
Yeah. And that's one of those deals, Jaden, as we meet new people, right? People will put on a pretty face for a while, right? And that, I understand, that can kind of resemble some sort of fruit, but it is, like it was talking about here, the constancy, right,
Mm-hmm.
of that. And eventually it will be revealed,
I see. I suppose that's what I was questioning with it will be obvious,
Mm-hmm.
because it is not super
Yep.
obvious at the start, so I suppose.
Mhm.
Potentially not, yeah.
Yeah.
I see.
And that's not uncommon at all, in any relationship. those things are tested. And what tested means is that it is put in practice through time and situations. Those are the tests. Whatever the nature of those situations are, good or bad, and, to our benefit, even though we don't like it, it's the hard things, the difficult things, or the bad things that actually bring the most proof of the quality. I'm thinking about the differences between Boromir and Faramir. Boromir, and here we have the same example. Faramir, very reserved, more, maybe, I don't know, that they're the best example of overzealous or, wild versus fastidious. But when they were put to the test, I'm talking more about the fruit that was born out of their life. Boromir was very strong, courageous, he had a lot of strengths, a lot of things that received acclimate and the interest of man, the things that man desires and pushes forward. And he initially was given a very difficult time by Faramir was, when he offered in the place of Boromir to go on the journey to get the ring, or to the Council of Elrond. And what did his father say, at least in the movie script? An opportunity for Faramir to show his quality, right? Because he had already just undermined him. But then when it came to it, and he actually had to make that decision, remember Frodo, he captured Frodo, he brought him back and he was going to take him to the king, and then he had, in a sense, a crisis of conscience, because he could gain his father's approval and this great victory per se, or the capturing of this mighty gift, right? Or he could prove his true quality. And that's where Sam is such a crucial character in that, because he is so representative of a different standard. He doesn't change and shift. He's not very easily affected by certain things. And then he comes to Faramir and he says, "You've proven your quality." Of course, he didn't know about the conversation with his father, but that became a very meaningful, not just to the storyline for Faramir, but also to the reader. Like, oh, look at this difference between what the quality of a person's character in life really is, what's really a value, what really matters, and what ultimately will bring forth good fruit, good result from their life. Well, obviously, if you contrast Boromir and Faramir, it's easy to see that the lower way, that of a lesser acclaim among men, was the thing that actually spared humanity. The spared mankind in that time. That Frodo faced the same thing with manipulating the life of Gollum, or having some control over Gollum's life. Remember in Mordor, he's like, it's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had a chance.
Moria.
Moria. Yeah, you're right. And what did Gandalf say? No, it was pity that spared him. Who knows? That's that ancient wisdom at work there. You don't know yet, but there are certain principles in life that produce things that become very obvious. Sorry, detracted into Lord of the Rings things. It's easy to do. Well, somebody close us in prayer.
Father, bless this time and bless the teachings and the culture that follows. I pray for relational discernment and the striving for the good fruits produced in our lives and the lives of our peers. Let your culture be predominant here, Lord. Let us follow in your way and your path. Bless our conversations and our interactions with one another throughout this day, Lord. Let the teachings not come from ourselves, but from you. Let us learn what you are trying to teach us, Father. Bless your holy name.